Okay, so today I'm in Hampshire with Kevin Pullein. Thanks very much, Kevin, for agreeing to talk to us today. I think a lot of punters, especially football punters, will know exactly who you are, but if they don't, you were a very successful football tipster. So successful that you had 27 consecutive winning seasons tipping. Now, how on earth did you stay so consistently good and even win in the first place is the feat.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you and welcome for being here. I think as far as consistency is concerned, I would have to say, first of all, I was lucky. I did some calculations a few years back, sort of taking the number of tips that I gave, what sort of odds that I was tipping at, and what I believed my edge to be, and trying to work out how often I should have a losing season. And I found out that I really ought to have had some losing seasons along the way. So with those underlying rather numbers, I was lucky to have sort of consecutive winning seasons all the time. And as far as getting an edge in the first place, there are many reasons, and I think we'll probably come onto them as we go along and as we're talking. But one of them, I'm convinced, is that I really wasn't convinced that I did have a winning edge. I was always doubting myself all the time. And for that reason, I was just always so thorough in everything I was looking at, trying to find out whether my opinion really was right and whether the bookmaker did happen on this occasion to be wrong. Because even through all the years that I was going along doing this stuff, I knew it's rare for bookmakers to be wrong. And so if they have one opinion and I've got another, one of us is wrong, and it could well be me, and I didn't want it to be me. So I was always trying to give myself the best possible chance of being right.
Okay, now the football season, I mean, it's not a marathon. I mean, it is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So how often during one of those winning seasons did showing a profit look unlikely?
In several of them, I'd have to be honest with you. There were times when one of the winning seasons that I should have had almost did come along. There were other seasons when I would get to March or maybe even by February time, and I would know that I was okay, that whatever happened afterwards, it couldn't take away everything that I'd built up to that point. So those were obviously very nice times. But there were several seasons when it was nip and tuck, and it could have gone the other way.
Did you, when you were well ahead in February, did you sort of reduce your stakes to guarantee you were going to stay, or did you stay consistent as you were doing for the rest of the season?
No, I can honestly say no. It wasn't that way of looking at things, of getting to a point of saying, oh, if I reduce my stakes, then I'll stay ahead. Because my stakes, particularly in the later years, they tended to be sort of fairly uniform anyway. It was like 1 point a time. But if I got to the stage where if I'd carried on with the same volume of tips and at the same level of staking, that I was guaranteed a profit, then it felt nice. And there were times when things went well, and that happened quite early on. And there were other times when it didn't, and I was lucky to get over the line.
Okay, so your betting and analysis of the football is based on statistics, if I've got my facts right. I mean, what drew you to that sphere in the first place? Were you into that sort of thing before? Were you a sort of a numbers, a stats person?
Not really. I would have to say that the way I got into it was I was looking to try to find a niche. I was at that time sort of like a general freelance football journalist, and I was a struggling football journalist. I didn't have many commissions, and the ones that I did get tended to be just sort of, oh, you do one article here and then they wouldn't want another one, or you do an article there and they wouldn't do another one. And I was trying to think of ways or find things that maybe I could do that other people didn't do. You would get, for example, I probably could write a match report, and I could go into the interview room afterwards and I could take down quotes from the manager. But there were loads of other people who could do this, and they could do it better than I could do it probably. There was no particular reason why an editor should employ me rather than one of those people. So I was trying to think are there any things in which the situation would be the other way round? Are there any things that I could do that other people don't do? And maybe there might be an interest in them. And so it was in that way that I came up with the idea of thinking, can I try to analyse football statistically? And when I say statistically, in those days, the only stats out there really were the scores, so it had been really quite basic stuff. And so I thought, oh yeah, I would like to try to do this. Sounds quite interesting. Who might be interested in reading about it? And things are very different now, but I quickly found out at that time that amongst the ordinary newspapers and general football magazines, there was no interest whatsoever, just completely blank response. And then I got round to thinking, well, maybe people who bet might be interested in this stuff, if I can find anything worthwhile amongst all these numbers. And so it was through that route that I came round to sort of approaching betting publications, really. It was just pure necessity on my part.
So where did you farm all these figures from? I mean, these days you'd be able to go on the internet and hopefully there'd be accurate figures out there. But I mean, did you have to literally sit there and count throw-ins and corners and things like that?
Well, in those days it wasn't throw-ins and corners because nobody had even thought about it at that time. It was much more just analysis of results and scores and those sort of things. And the way I did it in those times was I had bits of paper and I just wrote down the scores each week for every team. I had a sheet of paper for each team in each division, and I wrote down who they were playing and what the date was and what the venue was and what the score was. And maybe I had half-time scores as well. I don't know. I can't remember now. But it was even before I'd got into any sort of computers at all. So it was really, really crude stuff. And the analysis of it, as you can imagine, was extraordinarily time-consuming, but that was what I did.
So thinking back, trying to think back myself that far, at that point, the only books I remember really seeing were all focused on the football pools, where there were facts and figures and stats and things like that.
Yes, well, you're quite right. I mean, I should have said a moment ago that, when you were talking about what forms of football betting there might have been, and you were mentioning corners and cards and what have you, and I said no. But yes, really, at that time, by far and away, the biggest football betting medium was the pools. So a lot of the stuff that I was doing was trying to find ways of finding draws, and it's quite frustrating and quite humiliating in a way. What you're trying to do on the pools is you're trying to find draws, in particular score draws. Now, the commonest score in professional football, I soon found out, is 1-1, i.e. a score draw. It happens more often than any other score. But finding them, getting ways to identify when it's going to occur here and not there, definitely difficult,
And it was ultimately the National Lottery that sort of, I know the pools still go, but the days of the pools were finished when the National Lottery started, weren't they? So that, and back in the day, you needed to bet 5 home wins on a coupon, that sort of thing, at that sort of time.
Oh, you did indeed. I'm moving on a little bit, but by the time that I got to working on the Racing and Football Outlook,
which is my next question anyway. So
right. It was sort of in this changeover period. The football pools, as I say, was a big sort of the biggest football betting medium, and lots of people who liked football did the pools. But the reason it was such a monstrous thing was that everybody else did it as well. They wanted a lottery, and there wasn't a lottery in those days, and the pools was the nearest thing you could get to it. So loads of other people who had no interest in football, they used to do the pools. As soon as the lottery came, they all went off and they did the lottery instead. And the other football betting in those days, we're talking sort of early 90s now, early 1990s, was fixed odds football coupon bettings. But it was very rigid and very hard. As you rightly say, you couldn't bet a single, even on the result of a match. It was minimum trebles. And if, heaven forbid, one of your teams happened to be playing at home, it was minimum 5-folds. So it wasn't easy.
So when you went to you mentioned the Racing and Football Outlook, your big chance you were taken on there. Yeah. And you were their first football editor. And I was quite surprised to read that you said they previously had won one editor covering football and racing, which are, pretty different, aren't they? So was that your idea, or do they just decide to get a football editor for the first time?
No, it was their idea, and I'll tell you a little bit more in a moment about how I sort of got to be there. But at that time, I actually got a job with them as a columnist, first of all, once a fortnight. And various things were happening in the betting field towards racing and also to do with football. On the racing side, Sunday racing was starting to come along. And that meant they had to sort of reconfigure the way they worked and when they published and that sort of thing. And I think everything became more involved for them. And on the football side, although the pools was dying off, other forms of football betting, first of all, fixed odds, were starting to take off. So it was their idea to employ a football editor, and I was lucky enough to be asked to take on the position. And I was invited to apply because by that time, as I mentioned, I was a columnist with them. And I just sent them an article on spec, I was talking also a few minutes ago about how and why I got into sort of statistical analysis of football. And one of the articles I produced, I just sent on spec to the Racing and Football Outlook. And it was an article about sequences. What happens, after so many wins, so many draws, so many losses, that sort of thing. And half the title of the publication, as you know, is racing. And more than half the content, certainly in those days, was racing. So I thought, to give myself a better chance, I should get something in it about racing. But I didn't know anything about racing. So I come up with this very sort of feeble line of starting off with an intro which said something like, you should always back a horse that came last in its previous race because it should be fresher than the other ones. And that was a way of getting into talking about one thing following on to another and then talking about sequences. And I sent this article to them. And in those days, I was used to the reality of life as a freelancer, which was you send stuff off to people and 99 times out of 100 you don't hear anything. And the other time they say, no, thank you. Why would we be interested in this? But it was different with the Racing Football Outlook. A few days later, Richard Williams, who was one of the two co-owners at the time, he rang me up, and I got to find out later he's a really, really, really lovely guy. And he rang me up and he said, we'd like to publish this. We'll publish it this week. See if we get any feedback, and if we do, we can maybe make it a regular feature. So, wow! Hope you get some feedback, and I didn't know how, in what way they would get feedback. So anyway, the thing was published, and then the following week, I think it was the following week, I got a letter from him, and I opened this letter, and he said, the article went down well. We'd like you to do a regular column once a fortnight. I think it was 600 words. And we'd like you to do it in perpetuity. And I thought, oh my goodness, I had no regular work at that time. And here was somebody asking me to work for them forever, basically. Or at least that's what it said in the letter. And I think I still got the letter somewhere in one of my cupboards over there. And I can't remember how much they paid me. It was the right amount for them at that time, but it really wasn't very much money, But I thought, well, I've got a chance, I've got an opening. And I would spend days, maybe sometimes even like a whole week, with my bits of paper, trying to research something, come up with something good. Spending way more time than was appropriate for the fee I was getting. But I was thinking, well, maybe if I do this and I can do it well, maybe it'll lead on to something else. I didn't know quite how or in what way it all worked, but that was my idea, and that was how I got into start working with the Racing and Football Outlook, yes.